Welcome to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. Today we have an incredible journey to share with you. I'm your host, Anthony Dahya, and I'm so grateful that you're here listening to this podcast episode. And if you'd love for you to share this podcast episode with your friends, your family, and your workmates. And if you haven't already done so, please follow this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes and we can get this podcast out to the wider community. Today, it's my absolute pleasure and privilege to welcome you all to this podcast interview. Now, it's no secret that the last few years have taken a toll on all of us, and amongst those hit hardest are nurses. Most of us know a nurse, and if you've asked them about burnout, the majority would say they've either experienced it themselves or they've seen multiple co-workers struggling with it daily. People often say that your level of exhaustion, ability to cope, and establish a routine will get better with more experience. However, our special guest from Perth, Western Australia, has an entirely different perspective on the matter. It is with great pleasure I introduce Jeanelle Classen, a passionate advocate for beating and preventing burnout among nurses. Jeanelle Classen is a FIFO wife, mother of two, and a registered nurse dedicated to combating and preventing burnout in the nursing profession. At the beginning of 2023, she wrote a self-published book, Nursing the Nurse, the ultimate 6-step guide to beating burnout, which has since led to creation of her signature walkthrough program and the wellness app. Nursing the Nurse, Holistic Huddle, this app takes a holistic approach to unique needs of shift working nurses, helping them to thrive both at work and at home. Jeanelle's passion for resilience and wellness stems from numerous defining moments throughout her life, beginning in her early childhood and continuing in adulthood. Let's welcome Jeanelle Classen to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. Welcome, Jeanelle, to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. First of all, can you tell us what a FIFO or FIFO wife is?
Yeah, so FIFO wife basically means that my husband flies away. He goes and works on a mine site and then he flies back in. So fly in, fly out.
Right, got it. Because all the years in working as a storeman, FIFO meant first in, first out.
Oh, there you go.
So it's not that. So it's
not quite. Not quite.
So there you go, people. FIFO stands for, it has a new meaning. It means fly in, fly out. There you go. Awesome. So, Jeanelle, tell us a little bit about your childhood, your upbringing, who Jeanelle is, who Jeanelle was, where you've come from, where you are today. And we'd love to, and then we'll get into your journey around the burnout and resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. So my childhood, like many of us, it's got its ebbs and flows. I grew up in South Africa, and when I was about 6 years old, we moved states, and obviously that's quite a big time. Like for many young kids, it's like they're about to go into primary school, and they're starting to find their little identity and all that. And so when we moved, it just shook my world a little bit. And whilst academically I was doing okay, emotionally I was having trouble to adjust. And I obviously didn't have the emotional intelligence to tell my parents that at the time. So when they were noticing some things, they got some professional input and they said, yeah, she's doing great, but we do recommend keeping her back. And what that meant was that I was essentially held back a year. And so I was always technically older than my peers. And it wasn't an issue until I wanted to start participating in school sports when mums would find out that, this Jeanelle is a year older than their kids. And unfortunately, a 7-year-old had to then fight the battle of adults and was then told that you're too big, you're too tall, you're, all those things. You need to then, so they complained to the school, and the school decided that I would have to compete with all sports and physical activities with the next year up. So that was technically the same kids that the kids that were born in the same year as me. But I obviously had no relationship with any of them. And being a December baby, I was technically younger than all of them. So it was just a bit silly to if you think back to it. But then obviously that was a major thing that then impacted my self-confidence as a young girl. So I'd gone from being in the A and B teams down to C, D, E teams, and it really, really shook me. So from there, that was my first experience of having to practice resilience, and I fought tooth and nail, went to extra classes, worked so hard, like worked so hard, and eventually worked my way up to the B team by the time that I moved to Australia, which was a big achievement for myself. Like I had to prove to myself that I was good enough to compete with technically these older kids. So yeah, that was kind of where I came from. So when I moved to Australia, there was a little bit of a in between where I was homeschooled. I caught up with my academics a little bit. Thought like finally I'll be able to graduate with my same age group. Moved to Australia, and they said, look, if you want to go to uni, then you've got to go back to year 10. And at that point, academically, I was equivalent of year 11, 12. They didn't quite tell us that there was this thing called TAFE. But so we were like, okay, I want to go to uni, so I got to go back to year 10. So that meant the year that I graduated, I turned 19. And the youngest person I graduated with was 16. So I was the grandma of the year. I am still called grandma by the two people I'm still in contact with from high school. And again, that shook my confidence because I was like, oh my goodness, like here I go. I put all of this work in to catch up with my academics. I had just gone through all this drama with my sport. Why am I starting from scratch again? So that really, again, I had to work hard and I had to persevere, resilience. And looking back now, that was actually a very valuable experience because I wasn't just thrown into the deep end when it came to uni. Like I was actually able to get to learn the system a bit, the culture, all those things. And so, like I say, retrospectively, it actually worked out for the better. But at the time, it was the end of the world, basically. And then that brings me forward to when I graduated my nursing. I actually wanted to be a veterinarian. And then I was like, actually, you know what? I want my patients to talk back to me. So I was like, oh, maybe I do like fast-paced things. So why don't I go into paramedicine? Spoke to a couple of paramedics and they all recommended do some nursing first, get some experience, so you know what happens when the patient gets handed over to you from the street. But then I fell in love with nursing and I stayed in it. So I graduated. I was, gung-ho, I was ready to go, and got myself into burnout 6 months in, which then started a whole nother journey of resilience.
Can you start by sharing the personal journey that led you to focus on the nurse burnout and resilience?
Yeah, so like I say, when I started my nursing, I was so excited. I am passionate about helping the patients that I'm working with, and being a new nurse, everything is new, like doe-eyed. You're like, oh, this is so cool. This is amazing. And it was great until I started noticing that I was coming home, not wanting anyone to talk to me. I wanted to reach for the bottle. I wanted to sleep days away. I was calling in sick on days that I wasn't actually sick. I just didn't want to go into work. The thought of going to work sometimes brought a little bit of angst. Where I was like, oh, and dread even, I just didn't want to, I was like, I just don't want to deal. We were understaffed, overwhelmed, overworked. There's just too much to do. And I thought it was just me. And I thought maybe this is just because I'm new to the field, like it's going to get better, surely. But when I started noticing and hearing from my colleagues who had been in this industry for a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and they were saying the exact same things, I was like, hold up, I don't want to deal with this for 10 years of my life. Like I'm only at the beginning of my career. There's no way, surely. And I thought, okay, I'll be proactive about this and ask my superiors for some advice and some support. And the answer that I got, and I still laugh at this out of shock at it more than anything, is I asked, okay, I'm noticing these things. How can I improve it? The answer that I got was, get used to it. It's not going to get better. That's just the way that it is. Okay. So now we know that my history in my whole life has been one challenge. Let's push through it. One challenge. Let's find a solution. So I wasn't going to let it lie. absolutely not, and decided, okay, right, so if you guys don't want me to, because I offered to create what's called a quality improvement project. It's a QI project, and it's basically a project that we do a little bit of research, we put in some strategies, and we essentially publish this work to our ward, to see if it works. And I offered to do this around nurse burnout, and they're like, nah, don't add another thing to your to-do list, you're only new. So I was like, okay, I'll do it by myself. So I did it for myself. And it took me on a 2 to 3 year journey of getting coaching, watching so many trainings, reading too many books. And every time I found something that I was like, oh, surely this will be it. It just didn't hit the mark because it just wasn't tailored to the needs of the shift working nurse. It's, to tailor to someone who's got the capacity to wake up at 4:30 a.m. and have an hour of power, or like a stay-at-home mum who, it's hard work, but it's different work. It was just not tailored to those unique needs of the nurse. Like we wear so many hats, and I'm sure other professions do too, but especially nurses. On shift, we are caregivers, we are people's emotional support, all these things. And then we come home and we're the same thing, or even more. So I started taking little bits and pieces and piecing it together and creating a bit of a system. And as I was implementing it and I was sharing it with my colleagues, they're like, oh, this is really good. Like, and that's so simple. And I was like, yeah, it is. And then the more that I kept getting this feedback, the more I was noticing in myself that these things were improving. I was sleeping better. I was eating better. I was able to, leave work at the door, so to speak, and, kind of filter through and move on. When there was a traumatic event, I was able to work through that. I'd love to tell a quick story of what happens when nurses are burnt out, if that's okay.
Sure, go for it. Yeah.
So when nurses are burnt out and they don't have strategies to support themselves, this is the scenario that you'll often find, and I've come across this more than this once. So I was working in the Metro ICU. We just lost a patient. We weren't able to resuscitate them, and after we'd kind of done what we needed to do and cleared the room and notified the family, all that jazz, I asked my superior nurse, hey, are we going to have a debrief? We had just been in this medical emergency call for over an hour or two. Like it was a long time. Are we going to have a debrief? And she goes, no, it's going to happen again. Shift is almost over and we're very behind. I was like, what? This is insane. And so, then you're hearing the nurses go on about how exhausted they are mentally in the break room. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for dark humor. I'm all for let's just take a break from all the doom and gloom that we're sometimes surrounded with. However, there's a very fine balance where we're burying stuff and just kind of getting on with it. And that at the end of the day, it's just going to explode. And so if I didn't have the strategies in place that I did at the time, I would have been a blubbering mess and I probably wouldn't be nursing to this day. So that's just one example that I find that nurses just bury stuff and they think that I'm okay, like I'm strong, I can do it, I deal with it all the time, but it's still a life that was lost, or it was still a traumatic event in some capacity, and we need to deal with it.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how people just continue to do the same thing over and over and over again, but they're expecting different results.
Yep.
And we come in, and I'm very much like you. I just recently started a role. I've been there 3 months, but the second week I was there, they were like, "Oh, we need help with trying to get all the information in one place." And I just very quickly mocked something up, and they were, "Wow, this is amazing!" And I'm like, "Well, it's not rocket science." And but what it was is that I've had experience working with certain applications, and also experience in becoming more organized and working smarter, right?
Yeah.
And people just tend to get used to a certain way of working.
Yeah.
And as Einstein says, if you keep doing the same thing, you'll get the same result.
Yeah, 100%.
So it's important to try something different.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. It's a definition of insanity trying to do the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely. So, Janelle, how did your early experiences with resilience shape your approach to handling burnout as a nurse?
Well, look, I think it just always comes back to me, for me, to resilience. If yes, it's easy to say, oh, you have resilience because you went through all these things or because you were young or whatever. But I also think it's a mindset. Like you could very easily choose to just stop trying and just be like, oh, it's not cut out for me. Let me leave and go do something else. And that's what happens a lot in the nursing industry is we have a huge turnover, especially of nurses in the first 5 years or so, where they get into nursing and they think, oh, I must not be cut out for it. It was my dream my whole life to be a nurse, and oh, maybe it's not. It's heartbreaking because it's a lot of work to get a degree of any kind. And again, it's if it's your passion, then of course you want to do it. Yeah, you wouldn't be drawn to something if you couldn't be good at it. So it's a mindset, firstly, and for me, I think that's kind of what's carried through the years is choosing every time to try again, choosing every time to look at it from a different angle. And it's like, and I'm going to have a quick little deviation of what I think of when people try and do the same thing over and over again. It's like life is a river, and you're a little raft or a canoe or whatever. You're going down it. You reach rapids. Tough time, trauma, whatever. You can either choose to pick your canoe up, walk upstream, and go again, and of course you're going to reach that rapids again, or you can have a very bumpy road for bumpy ride for X amount of time, but once you're through it, guess what, there's calm waters. So yeah, that's absolutely the way I approach problems is we've got to get through these rapids. It's bloody hard, but we're going to get there.
Yeah,
Maybe we need to get out on the side for a brief second and come back in, but that's okay too.
yeah. And it's better to go with the flow of the river than to go against the flow of the river, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I think that's where that saying comes from, go with the flow,
Yeah.
because with ease and flow, make it easy on yourself and just go with the flow of the river. So yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah,
thank you
like
for
whatever
sharing that.
life, yeah, absolutely. Whatever life throws at you. Um, there's so many water metaphors I can think of right now, but we're gonna stop there.
Yeah, I think Bruce Lee had one as well, but I can't remember what it was. But he
Oh,
said, be the water, be the
yes.
yeah, that's right. Um, well, question I had for you was, what inspired you to write your book, Nursing the
Ah,
Nurse,
yeah.
and the ultimate six-step guide to beating burnout?
Mm. Well, like I say, when I started looking into what can I do that's different to just letting it happen to me, I and as I was getting feedback from these nurses and my colleagues, like I would share this little tip that I found, and they would be like, "Oh, this is great," and I'd be like, "Yeah, it is." And I was like, "Oh my goodness! Like I should put this together. I should put them together, and I should share it. Like I must share it. Like it would be a crime not to, because if one ward and one hospital experiences it, and I've worked in how many hospitals now? 3 hospitals and too many other facilities. Like I've worked in multiple GPs and aged care facilities. So I've got a wide range of experience. Same problems everywhere, same experience. And I started talking to people in UK and USA, and they're having the same stuff. It's just a different varying degrees, and of course, it shows itself in different ways. But the principle remains the same. So I was like, okay, I want to put it together. So I started writing my book and I started putting together what is going to work and what is going to be the simplest thing. Because at the end of the day, nurses are busy. They work shifts. They're not just nurses. They also, because it's a female dominated industry, they tend to be mums and partners and wives and all that jazz. So they wear many, many hats. And so I was like, this needs to be easy to implement and it needs to be like quick, punchy, useful, not just fluff. Because oh my goodness, I'm sure you've come across resources, read books and things, and they just harp on about nothing. It's like I've just read 10 pages and it told me nothing. So I was like, this book needs to it just needs to be value the whole way through. So that's what my motivation was. I need to get this out there and it needs to be useful. So I wrote and self-published that at the beginning of last year. Sorry, wrote it at the end of 2 years ago.
Yeah, I really I really like books that have the process, right? That take you through step by step. I'm reading a book at the moment called The Genie Within, and it's all about the subconscious mind.
Cool.
And the author actually takes you through the different exercises in terms of, like the alpha state, the theta state, and so on, the different brainwave states.
That's very cool.
And he also takes you through, what he's done is he's taken he's gone through a lot of different courses and events and so on, and he's basically created this book, which is like a course. So when you've read the book, you've actually finished the course.
That's really cool.
Which is awesome.
And that's pretty much how I wrote my book, actually, to be fair.
Yeah. And did you find writing that book did it come easy, or was it a bit there was a lot of late nights trying to come up with the information?
I giggle because it was the latter. There was a couple of late nights for sure. I am not a big writer. My nursing notes are, again, short and punchy. So it really did take a little while to kind of put all of my thoughts into order and get it down on paper. So I would make nutshells upon nutshells upon nutshells of what I wanted to write, and eventually just flesh them out a little bit, and ended up getting someone to help me just edit it and make sure that it was actually useful. Because writing a book, it's very cool, and I'm very honored and privileged to have written one. But it's a lot of work. I can see now why not everyone is an author.
Yeah, I want to write a book as well. So I've got to start.
It is exciting though. It is exactly, and that's the thing. Mine literally started with, I think I had 10 things that I use, and then I was like, oh, there's some themes here. I can consolidate them, and then it was like, okay, right, let's put pen to paper, and just got to take the plunge.
Nice. So, in your view, how does self-care and resilience differ, and why is this distinction so important for nurses?
So, I mean, resilience, like I was saying, it's a mindset, in my opinion. Yes, you can learn it, but it is a mindset. But whereas self-care, it's such a buzzword. What is self-care? What self-care to me is different to what self-care is for you and for anyone else. So I think the difference between self-care and resilience is that with resilience, you got to choose it. And with self-care, you got to have a how-to. That's how I teach it. So nurses don't get taught how to look after themselves. It gets drilled into them. If it's not written down, it didn't happen, do your documentation, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, just PS, make sure you look after yourself. Thank you. That's so useful. But self-care is a skill. You need to learn how to look after yourself. You need to learn what's going to fill your cup, so to speak. And resilience, you got to choose resilience, because when you're under the weather or when the going gets tough, you got to choose to get up and try again. You got to choose to not just let things happen to you. You got to, so that's the distinction that I like to make. And how it's important for nurses is we need both. You need the how for self-care, and that's my passion, is to share the how of self-care for nurses. And the resilience, choosing resilience is another one, because we don't just deal with burnout, we deal with everything else. So that's, again, another thing that I teach, is we talk about self-awareness and getting up and going on with it, getting on with it, essentially. So
cool, thank you. Can you explain how the key principles of the 6-step guide to beating burnout?
So those 6 steps, we start at the very beginning. Because what's the point if you don't have a solid foundation, right? So I started with, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Wheel of Life exercise, a very common, very common personal development tool. It's super general though. So I was like, okay, this is a really handy tool, but let's tailor it to nurses. So I created a mini Wheel of Life for nurses. And in the first chapter, we go over just kind of taking stock of where am I at, why am I feeling the way I'm feeling, and like which areas of my life are making me feel this way. Then we start looking at bringing self-awareness and how self-awareness brings forth self-care. And we talk a little bit about our defining moments and our belief systems and things like that. And that's, again, where resilience comes in. And then we start going into the practical. Not to say that the first two are practical, but they're a lot more like headspace things, whereas the next 4 chapters are more practical, and we go into our nutrition, our sleep habits, and creating a conducive to sleep environment, especially because we're shift workers. Got to transition from night shift, afternoon shift, morning shift is all over the shop. We also look at our habits, and my favorite one is the last chapter and last step, and that is learning how to unwind from our shifts, learning how to leave work at the door, learning how to show up as our ideal self when we are moving into our home life, and how to show up as our best nurse when we go into our professional life.
What are some of the common misconceptions about nurse burnout that you believe that contribute to the problem?
Look, there are so many, but one of the ones that I share about, like, there's actually 3 major ones that I share in one of my free trainings. But one of the ones that comes to mind immediately is many of us think that experiencing the symptoms of burnout are normal, and that's where I was. So when you start feeling like you can't get to sleep, or you can't, you're not eating well, or you're feeling angst before going into work, or you're getting overwhelmed super easy when you previously weren't feeling, you could cope better previously. Those are some red flags to kind of go take stock of, like, maybe there's something else going on. Maybe it's, so what I would say is one of the biggest myths is thinking that it will get better with time. The more experience I get, I'm just new. So the more experience I get, surely it'll get better. I'll get better at dealing. No, you won't. You are probably going to either bury it, or you're going to burn out. And, you'll bury it and you'll burn out later, or you'll burn out now. So that's one of the biggest myths, is thinking that it's normal to feel the way that you're feeling. And thinking it's normal that it should be this hard. And if you turn to your nurses and they're experiencing the same thing, and they're years ahead of you in the career, they just haven't learned. They haven't identified it. It's not normal. That is a big one. There's another one that I also share, and that is about, to be a good team member and a good nurse, you got to say yes all the time. You got to be this yes person. Yes. I want to say yes man, but very few men. So yes woman. And that's how, you don't want to rock the boat. You just want to be everything for everyone. No. The more you say no and become healthily selfish, the better nurse you'll be, the better team member, the more valuable. And that's another myth. And I honestly, I can't remember the third one off the top of my head right now. But those are 2 of the biggest ones. And it's so powerful and so important to know. For sure.
It's so important to prioritize yourself and then set boundaries and make sure that you're not just saying yes just to please people, right?
Yeah, 100%. Oh, the third one is unwinding, learning how to unwind. And, how it's an important skill that we don't get taught. It makes me very, very sad that we don't get taught the skill in nursing, because it's vital. So those are the 3 things that I go through in my training to share. These are the how-tos, because you don't get taught it in uni. So, yeah.
Yeah. I must say that with this podcast, I've been spending a lot of hours, mornings and evenings. And then a good friend said to me that I need to make sure that I'm looking after myself and taking care of myself, self-care, and prioritizing myself. So I made a point, took that on board, and I blocked out certain days that I'm just going to focus on me.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So important, because otherwise you'll burn out, and you'll either fall out of love with what you're doing, or you'll burn out and you'll stop doing what you love anyway. It's just, it's like the end result is the same. It's just different routes of getting there.
Yeah, exactly. So Jeanelle, tell us how the nursing the nurse holistic huddle app. How does it support nurses in managing their mental and physical health?
So after I wrote the book, published it had a great response. I'm very, very proud to say that it's got at least one 5-star review, and it was just, and that was from like an independent person, and I'm just like, oh, this makes me feel so good. But what I then started finding was, lo and behold, nurses don't have time. So I was like, okay, we need something that can be easily accessible. It needs to be at the tip of our fingers. It needs to be even shorter and punchier. It needs to be very, very impactful and easy to implement wherever, whenever. So I took those principles and I created a course that walks people through that. And we have a beautiful community around that. But then even further, I took that a step further, because why wouldn't you? And I subcontracted a physiotherapist, a nutritionist, and a mindset coach to work with me to create a health and wellness app that is for nurses specifically. So we go into each of those aspects as well as the principles from my book, and just created essentially a membership, like a gym membership, but with extra bells and whistles that you can access from your phone. And so that's we launched that in the middle of last year, and it's been so good to again, what a valuable resource. And the more I talk to people, the more they're like, oh, why isn't this in front of more people? I'm like, I know, that's why we're here. so yeah, that's where we're at. And it's just it's been really good. The feedback we've got is great, and we're constantly trying to improve and again, just make it extra like every opportunity that I get, I want to tailor it more to the needs of the nurse, and make sure that we're really going from a holistic point of view. Because again, like when I was looking for help and looking for resources of how am I going to beat my burnout, it was just like drips and drabs here and there, and I felt so scattered. And so having everything in one place is just so valuable. And it's as far as I know, there's no other like it. So it's
That's
so
great.
yeah, it's awesome.
That's great. And the collaboration would have been amazing, working with the three of you working
Yeah.
together.
So there's 4 of us in
Four of
total.
you, yeah, working
Mm.
together and coming up with all those ideas and strategies and perspectives and so on. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
My next question is around shift work. I've been in a few years ago, I did shift work,
Yeah.
and I can understand what it's like. What I'd like to understand is how challenging is shift work, and what specific strategies do you recommend for nurses who are doing shift work to avoid burnout?
Mm. So many ways to answer that. Look, shift work isn't going to stop because people don't stop needing care overnight. And so one of the ways that I kind of teach how do we manage shift work is you've got to have a routine in place that's working for you. I've created a bit of a template, and then I get nurses, like when we're working together, because we have regular catch-ups with everyone that comes into our world, and we just workshop like what's working for you, what's working for me, and all that jazz. So the kind of the framework that I use is you gotta know when you're sleeping, you gotta know when you're eating, and you also gotta manage your energy levels. And by energy levels, I mean like how much rest have you got and how many stimulants are you taking? And by stimulants, obviously we're talking about coffee, no other things, please. So I hold on. I want to say so many things. So about 3 years ago, I was living off of about 6 cups of coffee and tea a day, at least, like minimum. And then I was like, I think I might be a little bit dependent. And I quit cold turkey, and I went through proper withdrawals. I was shaking, I was headaches, I was cranky. It was awful. 4 to 6 weeks later, I was like, okay, like I feel okay. Don't get me wrong, like I still drink coffee and tea. It's just decaffeinated these days. I don't drink caffeinated drinks anymore. But when I forget to order decaf, I get the jitters, I get headaches, I get cranky, and it's like, oh wow, this really has a huge impact. So for me personally, when I go on night shift, as an example, when I'm transitioning, I will make sure that I have at least 3 or 4 hours of sleep before I go into my shift for that night, because it's very hard to just go, oh, I'm going to sleep all day, especially if you've got kids or your body clock is just not used to nighttime. So making sure you get at least a good chunk of sleep, even if it's broken up, I guess, like, just want some sleep to kind of get that bank up. Go to your shift. I drink a caffeinated cup of coffee around like 10 p.m. And then by the time it kicks in, we are in the slog of that between that 2 and 4 a.m. mark. Whew, that is a hard time to be awake and be alert for. And then I usually have a bit of a snack, and I basically just make sure that I've meal prepped for that week of nights. If you're a permanent night shifter, then obviously that'll look different. But I was working in ED and ICU, so every 4 weeks you're on a week of nights. And yeah, so I would make sure that my meals are prepped, my fridge is stocked, that I've got like blackout blinds and all these things. And then the biggest key of all is unwinding. Knowing how to unwind, knowing how to wind down is a big one. So there's so many different things that work for so many different people. Unfortunately, some people think that they need sleep meds, or that they just can't sleep while they're on nights or whatever. But whenever I've worked with someone, a lot of the time, and sometimes there are exceptions, but a lot of the time it's just that they haven't thought about like the environment that they're sleeping in. They haven't thought about like their mind is still busy and how to leave that, because often we're like, oh, I forgot to write this down, or oh, I forgot to give this medication. And then we're like on the phone to the ward being like, oh, I forgot this about that. And it's like, we've got to clear all that. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers the question. There's just so many things you can do. It's huge. It's a huge topic.
It did. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure that listeners got something out of that.
I hope so.
Yeah. How can hospitals and healthcare organisations better support their nursing staff in preventing burnout?
This is another project on my to-do list. Hopefully before I retire from my passionate journey on beating burnout for nurses, is teaching our leaders how to look after their nurses. There's so many memes out there of like, oh, like it's International Nurses Day and I got a rock that says keep doing good work, or you're a rock, or whatever, like something silly. And it's like, that really didn't help. Like, you're overworked, underappreciated a lot of the time. So I think that says a lot. Is, nurses need to feel like nurses, like any other human being, need to feel appreciated and seen. That's a beginning. But then actually making a safe space for nurses to come to you, and you can have like a set of tools that you can be like, try this, try that. Not just being like, oh, that's just the way it is, it's not going to get better. Like, how is that useful? So that's, basically my aim is to have the opposite conversation, to create opportunity for the opposite conversation of what I had as a grad nurse with my superior. And that was one example. Another example, again, like maybe 2 or 3 months after that, was I was in my nurse manager's office, and I asked, how do I deal with the trauma of patients passing, or patients abusing me, or their family members doing the same. And she just passed me a card that said, here, you can have like 3 free sessions with a counselor that the hospital pays for. And I was like, that's really cool. It's not going to fix it. It's not going to prevent it. It's not going to teach me how to deal with it, other than just, like, again, don't get me wrong, counseling, mental health care, huge, very needed. Not what you need when you're trying to prevent burnout. So again, like that, I think that was my biggest one, is like equipping our leaders need to learn how to equip themselves with tools that they can actually share with their junior staff, and even the ones that don't know it, and creating a safe space for them to do that, and making them feel heard and seen. And I want to go further to say, not just make them feel heard and seen, but actually hear and see them. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. What advice would you give a nurse who's currently experiencing burnout and feels like there's no way out?
You're heard and seen is my first thing. Like it's I don't want to say this and like make it feel like it's demeaning in any way, but like you're not alone. And like it's just there's so many of us, and many of us we're suffering in silence, or we're thinking that it's me, like I'm the problem, when it's not you. It is that we do work and we do live in a broken system. And unfortunately, we might not be able to change the system, but we can change what we do and how we approach it. So my biggest tip is, firstly, you gotta have a bit of grace for yourself. It's okay that you're feeling the way you're feeling. Let's start looking at how we can improve that. And the first step would be is looking for something, just that first little tidbit that's going to help you do something different, whether that is like different way of setting up your room or a different way of preparing for your shift. Like I do, again, in my holistic huddle program, we have like a little meditation you can do before you walk on shift, or a wind down meditation after shift. Like there's just like small things, like you can take 2 minutes and just start with something. Change your trajectory slightly every day, and you'll end up in a completely different place at the end of the day, at the end of the year. And yeah, like if you don't know, if you're feeling overwhelmed, then speaking up, and not just speaking up in the break room and complaining together, because complaining together is again not going to change anything, but actually going and finding someone or something who knows, because otherwise nothing's going to change.
All right. Sounds like the kids are having fun there.
We're riding up and down the hallway. So do apologize for that noise, but they're having fun.
It's all good. It's all good. All right, we're at that stage. 5 quick fire questions. You can answer that with one word, or you can answer that in a sentence. So first question is, how do you define success, and has that definition changed for you over time?
Yes, it has changed over time. Success to me previously meant that I needed to get everything right. These days, it's all about imperfect action. Taking action. If you take action, you've done something. And if it didn't work, you're going to tweak it and you're going to change it. So yes, I think that answers the first part as well.
Totally. Yeah. Second question, who has been your greatest inspiration and why?
It's going to be a random one for you. My inspiration, my whole life since, I don't know, when was I? Like year 4, has been Roger Federer. He is just, so I am not known for my patience. I am not known for my patience. So having a role model for as long as I can remember, I mean, he's obviously retired now, but he's just, to me, on the court, when the going gets tough, he's as cool as a cucumber. And he, you can see sometimes like this, the inner struggle, but then you can see how he just reels it in and goes, it's business, it's go time. And then at the end of it, he's just this fantastic smile of like, I got through it. And that's why I strive to be in the moment when the going gets tough to get it done, but then at the end of the day, kind of reflect and go, I got there.
Cool. What is something that you believe in that others may disagree with?
I believe that it's not the system's fault that you're burnt out. And people might disagree with that because the system is broken. But like I said before, it's very important for us to take responsibility for our own selves and focus on what we can control. And if I can control how I respond to something, then that's what I'll do, is I'll take responsibility and I'll change what I can do and not just let things happen to me.
If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of information, what would it be?
It doesn't get easier, but you get better at dealing with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And lastly, what is one message that you'd like to share with the world?
That it is possible to beat and prevent nurse burnout, that we are able to have it all, so to speak. We can show up as our best selves and the biggest caregivers and best caregivers on the shift, but we can also have a personal life where our relationships are flourishing and where we get sleep and where we're looking after our bodies, whether that's through diet and exercise or self-care or whatever, it is possible. It's not just a dream. You just got to have the right systems in place and the right boundaries in place.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, Jeanelle, it's been great having you on this podcast episode.
Mm.
If the viewers and listeners would like to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that? And do you have any programs or anything that you're currently giving away or you have an offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a fantastic Facebook group community called Nursing the Nurse. So if someone's looking for community, we'd love to have you in. And I regularly share some hints and tips and some inspiration and share just what's going on in my world. I'll obviously share like the podcasts that I go on, blog posts that I write, and things like that. But one thing that I'm really wanting to get out there at the moment is a free training that I created that goes over 3 of the biggest things that impact the ability of a nurse to beat burnout. And it's called How to Create the Work-Life Balance and Self-Care that you need as a nurse without leaving an industry you love and being burnt out or without feeling guilty. So that is something that I get. And if you want to get a copy of that, there's limited access to it. So if you just hop onto www.nursingthenurse.com, you can grab that there. And if you have any trouble, please reach out. I'd love to help in any way I can.
Great. What we'll do is we'll put those links into the podcast description, and then people can click on those and visit your sites.
Absolutely. Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here with us today. I've learned a lot today.
I'm glad. Me too.
I'm always learning. Yeah. I'm always learning with these podcast episodes. Something that I didn't know yesterday, I've learned today. So yeah. And look, if you've been listening to this podcast episode and you've got some insight or some gold out of this, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with other people. So make sure you share this episode with your friends, your family, your workmates. If you know a nurse, send the link to the nurse and say, listen to this. And if you haven't already done so, please follow this podcast episode or this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes.
Yeah.
And I would like to say, champion your life and champion your greatness. And remember, you are worthy and anything is possible. So go for it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.